Welcome to my channel, Botswana Thinking Law, where I bring you and the law closer. In this video, which is part 2 on land, we will be talking about freehold land. But before we get started in this video, I'd like to put in a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. This is simply a sharing of general information. If you have a problem of a legal nature, please engage the services of an attorney. I also wanted to let you know that the video also has timestamps. And if you're on a laptop or computer, if you're looking at the video, you'll see at the bottom of the video there's a broken line there. And every time you go to a certain portion in the broken line, you'll see that it's a specific topic. So you can use that to skip to different topics on the video. Or if you're also on your computer or laptop or on your phone, you can go to the description. And the way to get to the description when you're on your laptop or computer is to go to show more, scroll down from the socials, you'll see the time codes. If you're on your mobile, you just press the arrow button and it will show you the description. You also scroll down until you get to the time codes, and then you just press on the blue portion on the time codes and it will take you to that particular time and topic on the video. Now back to our video. Freehold land is a very peculiar type of land in Botswana. Freehold land is land that is a relic from the time when Botswana was a protectorate. At the time Botswana became a protectorate, there were certain patches of land that were considered to be unalienated crown land. And by crown land, it was referring to the United Kingdom. Now, these pieces of crown land were dealt with and treated in various ways. Some crown land was given to the government of Bechuanaland at that time, and some crown land was given to certain companies. When the crown land was granted, it was granted by way of Certificate of Registered Crown Title. After that crown land was granted, it was then dealt with in different ways. Some of the crown land given to the Bechuanaland Protectorate was treated as state land, and that is where the deed of grant was given out, or a deed of fixed period state grant, depending on how the government wanted to issue the land. And please watch my video where I deal with state land, which is part 1, when I deal with land generally. Some of that freehold land, which had been given to different companies, was then transferred to individuals or other companies by way of deed of transfer. The thing that makes freehold land peculiar is the fact that that land is owned by the person in perpetuity. This means it is owned by that person forever. Of course, it's subject to certain issues of law, such as expropriation. Once the person is given this freehold land or receives transfers this freehold land, the freehold land, the reason why it was said to be in perpetuity or is said to be in perpetuity is because it is for a period of 999 years. And inside the deed, the conditions are that when that 999 years comes to an end, it is automatically renewed for another 999 years. It is for that reason that it is said that freehold land is in perpetuity, because it keeps automatically renewing itself over and over again. In addition to that, unlike state land, free freehold land can be transferred without development on it. This means if freehold land is issued or zoned for a particular use, you don't necessarily have to have a structure on that land for you to be able to transfer it. There are different types of freehold land due to the zoning of that freehold land. Freehold land can be zoned for residential use or agricultural use, and if it is zoned for residential use, that freehold land can be transferred without issue to individuals, whether they are citizens or non-citizens. It can be sold to those individuals without issue. It is important to know this distinction because in respect of freehold agricultural land, it is not so straightforward. This is because in instances of freehold land that is agricultural, there is an act that dictates how that property is to be dealt with, being the Land Control Act. And the Land Control Act provides that if freehold land is donated or sold or in any way disposed of to a person who is not a citizen. And here when I say person, I mean natural persons or juristic persons and so on. Please watch my video where I discuss legal capacity because I deal with the different entities in terms of the law. If the individual is not or a person is not a citizen of Botswana, the Land Control Act provides that 1. The sale or alienation or disposal of this freehold agricultural land has to be advertised in order for its citizen to indicate whether they are willing to take on or intercede and take over this transaction from the non-citizen. And then 2, if there is no citizen who is willing to take over this transaction, there has to be ministerial consent given for the transaction to go ahead. So there are 2 hurdles. There has to be an advert for a citizen to indicate whether they want to take over the property, and when no citizens take over or show that they're willing to take over, then an application has to be made to the minister for the minister to consent to the transaction. This is sometimes quite difficult, and it does not apply in respect of issues of inheritance. Meaning that if a person who owns land passes away and their heir or appointed beneficiary is a non-citizen, they do not have to go through these hoops. And that is because this is an inheritance. It is not a person simply donating the property or selling it to a third party. When freehold land is zoned for a particular use, it can be subdivided, but the subdivision can only be to a certain extent. If freehold land is zoned for agricultural, it is very difficult or almost impossible for it to be subdivided to a certain point where now agricultural activities cannot take place. In order for a person to find out the extent to which they can subdivide the property, they should contact the relevant authority where that freehold land is situated, because it is that authority that will decide to approve or decline the subdivision of the freehold land. In addition to this, freehold land can also be leased out. And when I say leased out, I'm not talking about leases given in the form of tribal land. I'm talking about where a person will say, I have this piece of freehold land which is 4 hectares, and I want to lease out 1 hectare. Then the person who owns that freehold land will get the 1 hectare surveyed for lease purposes, not for subdivision. And then the parties have to enter into an agreement by way of a notarial deed of lease. And that notarial deed of lease will be prepared by a notary public to be signed by both the leasee and the leaser. And this notarial deed of lease is then registered with the deeds registry. And once it is registered with the deeds registry, then this notarial deed of lease is a title deed like any other, and it can be used as security for a mortgage bond. Inside this notarial deed of lease, there will be various conditions on how the lease is to operate. And one of the important issues that are dealt with is the expiry of the lease and what happens when the lease comes to an end. An example is that you could have a lease for 10 years. This lease will be registered, and inside the notarial deed used to register the lease, it will say, when this 10 years comes to an end, any developments you have put on the land will come back to me as the owner of the freehold land. One has to understand, however, that this lease is registered in terms of the law that says in order for a lease to be registered at the deeds registry, it has to be a long-term lease. This means that it cannot be for a period of less than 10 years. And this 10 years could be just 10 years put on the lease, or it can be 10 years broken down. Once the lease has been registered, then it can be ceded to another person. As an example, if Bonolo is the owner of freehold land and Bonolo leases a portion or the entire freehold land to Masego, once Masego has the notarial deed registered at the deeds registry, then Masego can decide, you know what, I want to sell my rights, title and interest in this deed to Boto. Of course, I as Bonolo have to consent depending on what the lease says, but sometimes the lease can say I don't have to consent. But if then Masego cedes this lease to Boto, Boto also has to be advised of the conditions of the original lease. Because if Boto develops the property, at the end of 10 years, the property goes back to the original owner, being Bonolo. Another issue that has to be looked at in respect of these leases, even when they're ceded to this third party, could be the fact that this lease can also be used as security for the registration of a mortgage bond to be given a loan by an individual or a bank. And in dealing with these leases, the law on leases applies. An example of this law is the law of lease before sale. This means if the 10 years has not come to an end and Bonolo wants to sell her freehold land to Maipelo, Maipelo does not have the right to cancel the lease that Botho Omaleboro has, unless Botho Omaleboro agree that the lease can be cancelled earlier. So the freehold land can be transferred to Maipelo, but it will have that lease existing on it until that lease comes to an end. When the lease comes to an end, then the property will go back to the owner of the freehold land, and at that point in time, it would be Maipelo. I hope this was very informative and it can give you an appreciation on how freehold land operates. If there's a specific issue you want me to deal with that I haven't dealt with when it comes to freehold land, please let me know in the comments down below, on my Facebook page, on my Twitter at BW Thinking Law. My Facebook page is Botswana Thinking Law, where I leave posts and comments every now and then. And one issue that people might be interested in this series on land could be the issue of servitude. So please let me know, and I will make sure that I try and cover the various topics that you want to hear about. Thank you for joining me on this channel. It is always a pleasure to have you with me. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the notification bell so that every time I put up a video, you get notified.